Ken. How are you doing today?
Why, it's Merrilee, my cousin. What a surprise.
How is beautiful Montana doing?
Oh, we're doing fine. We got heavy snow last night and this morning, so this is not going to go away. It's November 8th. Here in 2020. See, I just took off a century. And this is, I'm sure, not going to melt off like our last snow that we had.
And what's interesting, I just came in from a beautiful sunset in Newport where it's 70 degrees.
I know. Yeah, you mentioned that, and darn, I'm jealous. I'm just going to hang around, I think. We get the old ski boots out.
Right. Are you a skier?
I was. I haven't done much lately. I'm not anymore. I don't like the cold weather.
I think you're in the wrong place if you don't like the cold weather.
Well, I've been saying that for a long time. Yeah.
So anyway, let's start with your parents and where they're from and your heritage there.
Yeah. Might as well start at the beginning. Dad, Alan Theodore Green, was born in Blanco, Iowa in January 2nd, 1902. And Mom was born in Jamaica, March 1st, 1908. And it turns out that if Mom was born a day earlier, she would have been only 1/4 of her age, because it was a leap year. And instead of March 1st, it would have been the 28th. And she came to America when she was around 20 with her brother, Fred. Fred, I think, was the instigator. That's her younger brother. And she was 20 years old. Fred's a couple of years younger. And they ended up in San Francisco, and I don't know how they got there. I don't know the details there. But I do remember at our house when I was growing up how all the ladies from San Francisco came down with their crocheting and knitting on Sundays down to Redwood City, which was 25 miles south of San Francisco. And they'd all be knitting away and talking with the sweet voice that they had, sing song like Mignon and Sybil and Ione. They had these neat names. And that was, of course, in other words, a lot of people moved here from Jamaica, from the British West Indies at that time. And when I was 2 years old, I was born in San Francisco, by the way, June 14th, 43. And when I was 2 years old, we left San Francisco and moved to Redwood City. And the reason was it was so foggy in San Francisco that Dad wanted to get out of the fog. And I was happy about that too, I'm sure. But, I was just a little guy then. Because I don't know if you've heard it, but most people have it. Mark Twain said San Francisco was the coldest winter he ever spent was summer in San Francisco. And that's because of the fog. It's foggy there in the summer. It's actually nicer in the fall or early. So we moved down into Redwood City when I was 2 years old. And I got to admit, we're a typical middle-class family. Dad was a hard worker. We never had to really want for anything.
When did your parents get married?
No, they got married, I think, when Dad was about 36. So I think it was 38.
1938, you think?
Yes, I got the date here because I did get out Dad's papers.
That's okay, just to get an idea. That's fine.
Yeah. And in 38, so Dad would have been about 36. And of course, Mom was 6 years younger. And what Dad did was when we moved to Redwood City, when I was 2 years old, he bought an acre. He's a good businessman. He bought an acre of land down in Redwood City, which was kind of out in the boonies, 25 miles south of San Francisco. And then he cut it into thirds and sold off a third right away. And that probably paid for a lot of the land, the whole place. So we had an old house we were living in. And then and I remember too, a picture seeing us, but when we were little kids, Mom used to tie us to a tree because we were so rambunctious. Me, Harlan, and Patty, the three of us. At least that's a story I hear. But this was from when we moved first down to Redwood City, which would be 1945. And then we didn't move into a new house that Dad built until 1950.
So did he build that house himself?
Yeah, then he built a new house on that other third of an acre. We were on 1/3 of the end lot that had an existing house. So we moved down there when I was 2. And then Dad and his dad, Dad had his dad, I think it was a therapy thing for his dad, had him work on the house too. So the two of them built the house. And I remember moving into that house in 1950. I would have been 7 years old. But I remember carrying stuff into the house. And we bought our first TV from Montgomery Ward's. It was a 14-inch black and white. And the only thing on back then was Rimmer in the Jungle, a little kid riding an elephant around. As far as kids show went. But to backtrack a little bit, and this probably should be brought out. We were really energetic children, I guess, when we were young. And Mom had, of course, Harlan and I. Harlan came, and then 2 years later, me, and then 1.5 years, Mom. So the three of us were a bit much for Mom to handle. And Dad, being one sibling, having 12, a family of 12, he kind of expected the ladies to be good housekeepers and know what to do. Well, the problem was that Mom was raised in Jamaica with maids, so she hadn't been really trained. So she had what amounts to a nervous breakdown before we ever moved into the new house. And she was put in a home where they treated her, but it was pretty barbaric back then. It was shock treatments. But we'd go in and see her every now and then. And then we had a friend, Edith, who was also a Christian Scientist. Mom, of course, switched from being Jewish to being a Christian Scientist. And Edith Jacobs was a member of the church who came over, and she said we were the smartest children she ever saw. I don't know why she was saying that, but she helped us. And then Mom's mom, Julia Abrams, came in from, she was living in San Francisco now also. And that's where Dad and Mom met, by the way, was San Francisco. But Grandma Julia was quite a lady. She'd come down and take care of us too. And I remember her saying, eat your mush, eat your mush. And she told a really engrossing little story when we were little kids, a little bedtime story about a thimble and a thread and a needle and something magic going on. But I don't remember it now. I don't remember what's going on. But anyway, Mom came out okay, except she always complained they took away her science and health and wouldn't let her read it when she was institutionalized. But Mom really surpassed it quite well. So in 1950, we moved into the new house. We brought all our, I remember walking over this with the goods. And Dad was into planting gardens. He was really into gardening. So one thing he did was he planted rows of grapevines, big long rows of grapevines in the 1/3 of an acre, because it was a long lot. And I remember after a few years hiding in those grapevine bushes, and it was Thompson grapes and then purple seed grapes. But then we had also mulberry trees and all kinds of nice trees there. They were really good mulberries, but you got very messy eating them because they're so juicy. So we had Dad grew corn and had a big garden. And that was, when we were in the new house in the early 50s. And we actually we helped Dad dig a well together. He rigged up a pulley with a worm drive motor to help lift up the auger. All we used was post hole digger, and put that down. And at we hit water 30 feet or whatever it was. And then we had a pump, so we had our own water, and we had a little bit of chickens from time to time. So we had pretty nice childhood. We were out in the country. And Dad put in a basketball court a little bit later. And then when I was growing up, I remember we played with it was, as I mentioned, kind of a typical middle-class community we were living in. And I remember my neighbor, an older lady with a hat, just all these ladies Googling over us kids all the time. Mrs. Cronander, and she always had a bandana around her head. She's, an older lady. And we had friends next door with the Catholic Pennas that lived next 2 doors down, 4 boys. And I used to play with Peter, the youngest one, because we were both about the same age. We did all kinds of stuff, playing hide and seek, and we had rubber guns made out of spare tires that you'd cut the rubber, and if it backfired, you might get hit in the face with the rubber. Because we used clothespins, on a piece of wood that we made into guns that stretched the rubber. So we had our fun. And then progressing a little bit from there, when in 1959, we'd been in the new house for 9 years. Dad bought a house up in the hill of Redwood City. So in 1959, we moved up to Laurel Way in Redwood City. And actually, the folks stayed in that house till 1973, 14 years till they moved down to Santa Barbara, where we had all relocated by that time. But in 1959, we moved up to, and that's where Harlan was married. And a few years later. And I, of course, graduated from high school in 61 at the age of 18. And as far as my schooling went, I went to, and it was California, so I went to junior college, which was basically free. I think I had to buy books. So I ended up going to junior college. And my sports in high school really ended it. Really gravitated toward playing seriously in tennis and wrestling. Those are my 2 sports. And then when I went into junior high, I was also on the first string wrestling team for 167s. And I went ahead and when I graduated, went right into a junior college, San Mateo. And then after I'd been out of high school 2 years, which had been 1963, I went with some of my high school friends to Europe. So back in those days, it was acceptable to hitchhike. So I just hitchhiked all the way across country to take a student boat in New York from California, where we lived in California, to Europe. And I'd done hiking before that. We just, it was a lot of people hiked in those days. And it was California too. So I ended up taking a student boat over, and it was in September, into landing in Rotterdam, Holland. And then we're paired up with each other. And I remember distinctly in November, I was riding a motor scooter through the Alps into Innsbruck from Germany down into Italy, because this was in November and everybody knows this. So I got into I was riding this little Lambretta or Vespa, whichever. And I was going through the Alps and I said, "What's this white stuff?" And pretty soon I slipped and fell and, ended up going into Innsbruck with bloody knees. But I just took my time after that. But it was snow and ice. And I went into a bar in Innsbruck. As soon as I walked in, somebody said to me, "Your president has been assassinated." I said, "That's not funny. That's not a good joke." And it turns out this was November 23rd, 1963, when Kennedy was assassinated. So that everybody, you can ask everybody who's alive at that time and they'll remember where they were invariably during that time. Then I went on to the youth hostel and met some friends there and continued on down into Italy and then down into Sicily, and we slept on the beach in Sicily below Mount Etna. And it rained. I remember we built a little hut, but it didn't hold out the rain. It was cold all night. And then came back, worked our way around, mainly Billy Crane, a high school friend, and I worked our way around together. And we bought a little car and had a little open door in the front car and got rid of that and went through a few junky cars. But then I guess it must have been about November. I came down with bronchial asthma. When we were walking with my backpack, I couldn't walk hardly a week or a block. Couldn't hardly walk a block without stopping. So I had bronchial asthma, and when I was little, I had asthma, but I outgrew it all, and I was fine. But here, from sleeping out, I think in Sicily, reoccurred. Then this was in Spain, so I went into Madrid, and they gave me penicillin and took care of me. And it didn't cost a penny, and I was pretty amazed. And that still has sold me on having, let's say, socialized medicine, for want of a better word, but having just even, everybody they know what they're getting paid. They get paid the doctors get paid a good fee, but it's still nothing exorbitant, or, they all are on getting fairly, repaid for their work. So then we went down into Gibraltar and then Northern Africa. And this was in the January. And so we were getting kind of tired of cold. So most of us came back to the States, flew back, hit our parents up for money and then flew back. But that was my episode in Europe, and that was the only time I'd been there. So this was 63. And let's see, after that, I started going to Cal Poly, a full 4-year college in San Luis Obispo, California State Polytechnic College. And there I graduated, not for a few years, because I was lollygagging. Well, I wasn't the most studious student also, but I went there and graduated in aeronautical engineering in the spring of, I think it must have been 69. Yeah, it was 69. So I graduated from high school in 61. Then I did do real good in some of the mathematical orientated, like technical physics classes. I did some good in those, and if it was mathematically oriented, building cantilevers and things like this, levers. And so I had offers from McDonnell Douglas or Boeing when I graduated in 79. And I decided, well, I'd go with McDonnell Douglas because that's Southern California. I don't want to be in Northern Washington. So I went to work in Southern California for McDonnell Douglas, which, of course, since then has been swallowed up by Boeing. But I went to work there and ended up renting an apartment in Naples, a little island that was inside Belmont Shores, which was inside Long Beach. So I was down in Southern California, and it was a pretty nice life. I learned how to scuba dive, got certified national and local counties, LA. And almost every week we'd go sailing to Catalina Island with the people I knew in the apartments there. They were just real friendly. And then also I was, of course, in the proximity of cousin Gary, Lucille and John's son Gary, and Johnny. But Gary and I were about the same age, and he was liking to sail too. He had his own, he always had a boat he was working on, it seemed like, but that was his balancing formula for keeping an even keel, was going sailing. So I ended up doing a lot of sailing, put it that way, on the weekends, either with friends, and where I did scuba diving, looking for bugs, looking for, you know, crayfish, not crayfish, but lobsters, the big boys. Or going with Gary. And with Gary, I got to admit, it was kind of an adventure, because he tended to get excited sometimes. So, of course, the big episode I always tell about is how when I picked up a couple of hitchhikers on my way down to see him, and in his boat, Christian and Felipe from France. I picked them up and took them down to stay with me, I guess. And then Gary and I took him out sailing, and we got to Catalina, and it was dark by then. I remember that. It was dark, even though we were going into summer. And Gary said, okay. And he anchored the boat, and he said, well, we'll get in the dinghy and row into Catalina. So we started getting in the dinghy, and I said, Gary, there's 4 of us, and this is a small dinghy. Gary said, no, that's okay. Nothing's going to happen. I said, well, the water's coming right up to the gun rails here. So sure enough, we got swamped and the boat sank. And we all got in the water, and all 4 of us. And Christian, I felt somebody grabbing me around the neck when I was underwater. So I felt, I got up, and it was Christian. He's saying, I can't swim, and I've got a family, help me. So I don't know how we got out of that, but we got out of it, and we all survived. And then another time, I remember we went to Santa Cruz Island. And that's a big island out there next to Catalina, or towards Santa Barbara, actually, up a little north. We went to Santa Cruz Island, sailed out there. And then I came back, and I was getting a rash around my private parts. So I went to a doctor, and I said, I've got this rash. He looked and he said, get away from me, you've got lice. So I said, oh, really, that's why I was itching, So anyway, I had to, of course, wash all my clothes and sterilize things and all this. So it turned out that the sheep that lived on this island, Santa Cruz Island, had lice, and they'd go through the bushes, and so they'd get on the bushes. And of course, we walked through the bushes, so we picked them up too. Anyway, it was quite exciting times back then in LA, and Gary and I numerous times hitchhiked down to Mexico too. We weren't that far from Tijuana. And I remember going down, and sometimes once we got into the back of a fish truck, it was at night, and we ended up going to a sleazy motel, but it was excitement for us. This of course, is not even 30 years old.
And about that time, what was going on with Harlan and Patty? Harlan, you said, had gotten married, right?
Yeah, Harlan got married, I think, when he was around 24. That would have been in 65. Yeah, I remember the marriage was up in our house, up in Laurel Way in Redwood City, the house on the hill. And he married Sylvia, and he gave a pretty good history of what he was doing with filmmaking and working for Cesar Chavez.
And what about Patty? What about Patty?
And Patty, she was on, we all pretty much separated, but she was on her own path too. She ended up going to Humboldt State in Eureka, Northern California on the coast. And that's where she graduated in teaching. And she also did singing. And she became a teacher. It so happened that I met a guy in McDonnell Douglas, Dean May. We became friends, and he was a surfer. I liked his Volkswagen bus. That's what all the surfers had back those days, was Volkswagen bus. And he made a little wooden bed and everything to lay out there so he could sleep there and do his surfing, early in the morning or whatever. So he was a good engineer too at McDonnell Douglas with me. And I set Patty up with a date with him. Lo and behold, that's who she married.
Mhm.
You know, it was a while. They got married. Don't ask me what year it was, but it was probably a few years after I left McDonnell Douglas. But when I worked at McDonnell Douglas too, I'll just tell in passing, I sat next to this old freedom fighter, John Majoris from Hungary. He was an airline pilot. And when the Nazis took over Hungary, he stole an airplane and flew to America.
Hmm.
So he was sitting, and he was, you know, maybe 60 years old when I saw him in around 1970. And I was sitting next to him. And he was quite a character. We'd talk politics, and he said, all is kaput gegangen, and slammed the desk. And this was back in 1970, so things haven't changed, but all is kaput gegangen. And then he wanted to make me into a senator, and he had it all figured out how I was to latch onto the tailcoats of some successful politician and be a parent for him until I ran myself. Then I'd have my own independence. But anyway, he really wanted to make me, and I said, no, I don't want this. Not a young kid, as a young boy, that's not what I wanted to do. So anywho, McDonnell Douglas, after I worked there about 2 years, they started having some RIFs, reduction in force, they call it. And they made a big totem pole, and I was way up the totem pole, so I wasn't going to be axed at all. But then I thought to myself, well, I'm single, and I don't want these people with families to get terminated. So I just quit after I worked there 2 years, McDonnell Douglas, and basically went back and lived with the folks in Redwood City for a while, and just did odd jobs. And then actually, I guess this is kind of important to me, but when I quit McDonnell Douglas, I'd been frequenting a macrobiotic macrobiotic health food store. Macrobiotics was a big thing around 1970, which is the brown rice diet, misnomered. And of course, young people wouldn't know about that, but well, some do. But this lady who ran it, she was real helpful, real nice, and looked so healthy and everything. And her husband said I had a health problem. So I said, okay, I'll fix that. This is something that did affect me. So I ended up hitchhiking. I think it was the 4th of July, hitchhiking to Santa Fe, New Mexico, because I wanted to see the communes and see what this was like to live in a commune. Well, I ended up living in a Black Mesa Defense House. This would have been 71, right? Springtime after I quit McDonnell Douglas. And it was the defense for the Hopi Indians' sacred land that we were trying to drill on. That companies were trying to, drill on their land. So I ended up staying there for a month. And I did nothing but brown rice because that's the healing type of diet to do. Well, near the end of this time I was staying there with nothing but brown rice, I've been losing weight. And then I took a shower one time and I said, what's that sharp thing in my shoulder? That's my shoulder blade. And I'd lost muscle mass off my back. Because, when your body gets in extreme conditions, it'll start consuming yourself. It knows how to do it. It doesn't go at your organs right away. It just goes. So I weighed myself. I was down to 135. And remember when I wrestled, I had to lose weight to get to 167s because I weighed over 170 pounds. So here I was, bag of bones. And I came back, and of course, my mom was in semi-shock and came back to Redwood City, and she fed me up. So I gained back weight, but I never gained back all the weight, nor all the muscle after all these years. I go to the gym most days when I'm here in Montana, we got a real good gym with hot tub, pools, and everything, and steam room. But even though I work out, and then after that I did sports and played basketball, I never did gain back all my heft that I had before. So anyway, I hitched back to Redwood City, hitchhiked back, and did some odd jobs. And then the next year, and I call that year my macrobiotic year in 71. The next year, 1972, I was a Bay Area guy, so I was quite liberal, which is a little bit surprising because I was born on June 14th in 43, which happened to be Flag Day. And my whole demeanor, or at least my DNA, I guess it is patriotic. I love our country and I'm in favor of our country. So we won't go into politics here. We're going through some trials. And so in 72, I got into, believe it or not, mind dynamics, which is projecting your mind, your thoughts for healing people, or, all to a benefit of anybody involved. But mind dynamics was a technique where you quiet your mind, still your mind, which they do remote viewing nowadays, and they do all that in stack. In fact, the military really has gotten into that to find out what the Russians were doing, or the Chinese, or doing a bomb test. They just have somebody remote view who is able to see the results of their test, just because our mind is, of course, omnipotent, and we're all connected. It's just we've lost the ability for DSP because of our material lifestyle. Anyway, I got into mind dynamics and went on a hike to up to Tahoe with the Sierra Club Sierra Singles, and met a nice girl there that I went a little bit later, but she was on the hike too. So I ended up going to a lot of classes in San Francisco with the mind dynamics, and then come 73, early 1973, I got an offer from the Navy to go to work for the Navy down in Southern California. And I wasn't really up to taking it. It was Navy astronautics group. But Dad said, you should take it. And he was probably tired of having me in the house. So I'd been there on and off for 2 years. And of course, Harlan was off going to Boston University, and Patty was teaching school probably, or I don't think she was married then. Maybe she was. Anyway, so I said, okay, all right, I'll take it. So I went to work for Navy Astronautics Group in 1973 and ended up staying there 17 years. That was my engineering career. And it turned out that I didn't do drafting like I did at McDonnell Douglas. I did drafting and computerizing power performance plants for the engines and stuff at the aircraft company. But with the Navy, I became a satellite engineer, and my PD was actually to manage half the constellation of the satellites that were high priority for the Navy, because they needed to have a fix of where they're at if they ever had to launch their SSBNs, ever have to launch their missiles in nuclear submarines. We had all these subs, but if you didn't know your starting point, you could never calculate a target or anything. So we were actually the precursors of the GPS system that's omnipresent everywhere today. But ours was, back in 73, was a more archaic type of engineering. We used the Doppler shift, and then the memory. Every 12 hours, we'd update the memory in the satellite, telling where it was. That plus the shift of the satellite going over was enabling people to get a fix. Of course, the sub had to drag a boom behind its boat. So I ended up doing that, and I remember Joe Podorczyk was kind of my mentor, and he was the satellite engineer. So as I mentioned, I stayed there for quite a while. And it ended up turning into a career because there was a total of 6 satellites, and normally I would be managing 3 of them. But then, every now and then a satellite would die because they were running on solar power and batteries. And they were NiCad batteries, but they were real high-tech ones and aluminum casings and everything. And where was I? So that was my job. Every morning I'd look at the telemetry readouts on the satellites to see if they're healthy, and then I'd initiate power commands to do charge control or Zener diodes or add on a sun ray or whatever to make the power balance for particular, because the satellites were in a polar orbit. So they covered every satellite would cover the whole Earth in 24 hours as the Earth turned underneath both ways, up and down, because they were polar. Well, it turned into being an interesting job. I was sent back. Well, we actually launched from Vandenberg right there near where I worked at Point Mugu. We were a tenant organization. And I got sent back, though, after a while, back east to check out the new satellites that we were bringing online, because I went and developed the telemetry tables, the tables of converting the telemetry from volts into amps or whatever it needed to be, from getting the conversion tables. And these I did for each satellite. And I went back there and checked out the satellites and saw that they functioned properly. They were actually developed by Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory. But then the production was done by RCA, which was near there in Laurel, Maryland. So I had to fly across country a few times and did some training. And then in 1990, and this is something that you're asking about, in 1990, well, we bought a house. Okay, to backtrack a little bit, I guess I should mention when I met my wife. Anyway, I met my dear wife, Bethany, in church, in our church group. And that's a whole nother story. I could go on, for an hour just about this, but
how does
anyway.
that relate? How does that timing relate to when you were employed these 17 years, or when were you married right in the middle of that, or how does that work?
Yeah, pretty much in the middle. Yeah, I was going to get to that, but what happened was I was living down in Southern California, and Point Mugu is right on the ocean, because it was actually the Pacific Missile Test Center too, where they tested out the Kwajalein Islands and also we had a fighter squadron. But anyway, in 1977, around Christmas time, we went to a lecture by 2 ladies on your spiritual chakras, your 7 chakras, your spiritual centers that are within. And I really liked it. These 2 ladies were from the teaching center in Santa Barbara called the Mother House. So I ended up going down to a conference down in LA. It was a New Year's conference. They put on 4 conferences during the year. Every quarter there was a conference. And this was in LA. New Year's conference is called God is Mother, was the name of the conference. It was about Mother Mary and the great ladies who were spiritual warriors. And it was a big auditorium of some college or something. I don't know where we were. And after that, I was hooked, because it was teachings of the Ascended Masters, which are, there's plenty of them. It's not just Jesus, but there's Hilarion, Noah, Enoch, all these people that have ascended, and Saint Germain, which was kind of the main ascended master. He's a New Age Aquarian IARC. So I ended up going, of course, I was working the whole time. And this was just, maybe I'd take off for a little bit, but come 1978, I wanted to go to Summit University. Our church with Elizabeth Clare Prophet, she was the head of it. And she did dictations from, from the masters and from Archangel Michael or whoever. And, it's being done today too. But I told him I wanted to go to my Navy IARC. I told him I want to go to SU and it'll take 6 weeks. I want to be off for 6 weeks while I go to Summit University. I think it was 6 weeks. It might have been 3 months. But anyway, at least 6 weeks, which is over a month. And of course, they said, well, we don't want you, we can't let you do that. Because, I mean, if we let you go for 6 weeks, why do we need you? They said, well, fine, I'm doing it. So I just, I took a little hiatus. I left there and went to Summit University, and they were, a bunch of, they had a faculty and all that stuff, and you ate your meals there, and you lived in dorms, and they bust you sometimes if you were dorms or somewhere else. So I ended up taking a class, Summit University, and it was for Zadkiel's quarter, the 7th Archangel. Michael's the first, Zadkiel is the 7th. And so we did a lot of decrees and things like that. And then I came back to work, and there was no hassle. It was pretty seamless. And went back to taking care of my satellites. And then
so what about your marriage?
I'm getting to it. Don't rush me. Jack Benny said that, Anyway, it was after SU, after Summit University in 78, I also took a teacher's training, but that was just weekends. In the beginning of 78, I was assigned to the mother house in Santa Barbara, which is 50 miles from where I worked. I worked more in Southern California in Point Mugu, which is below Ventura. But then it was 50 miles, so I ended up carpooling. But anyway, I went to work. Lived at the mother house in Santa Barbara, beginning of 78. And, had to get up 5 a.m. every morning for prayers. And we had, a lot of things like that. It was world service. And in, must have been 81, Mother, we call Elizabeth Clare Prophet Mother, sent Bethany up to the mother house in Santa Barbara. And the mother house was kind of a sacred place because Lynello, who's her husband before he passed away, used to walk the halls there. And Lynello, Mark Prophet, her wife, they were married, Elizabeth and Mark Prophet. And he actually got initiated by St. El Moria. But so I remember it was like a breath of fresh air when she came up to the mother house in Santa Barbara, because we'd have a luncheon every Sunday after church. And we had a beautiful backyard because this was a Jewish synagogue that the church had bought. A beautiful big backyard with a patio and hedges around it and lawn. And Bethany, when she got there, I just remember her going around blowing bubbles. She had a little bubble blower, just like kids have. She'd jump up on the banister and be blowing bubbles and going around blowing them, like not a care in the world. And I go, wow, she's pretty neat. So we lived there until there's at least a dozen people living there. I lived in the boys' dorm and she lived in the girls' dorm. So there's probably about a dozen people. And we gave services, of course, the Sunday service and then the healing service and Friday evening. No, that was the Ascension. The healing was Wednesday. Anyway, it was decided in 1943 that they were going to close the mother house down. Oh, wait, no, this would have been 1983, because Bethany came in 81. So they decided that the church was going to close down the mother house, because in the meantime, we bought some property up in Montana from Malcolm Forbes. A lot of acreage, a real lot of land. We had a place that we call Camelot down in Calabasas, which is where, and that was a Catholic synagogue, a big place. But then we bought the place in Montana, and eventually we were planning on moving up there. There's a lot of details. I don't want to tell all the details.
Yeah. So how about your life in Montana, having children and all that?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you about the marriage first, because that's pretty succinct. Anywho, when the mother house closed down, which was early summer, or must have been late spring. It was spring of 83. Bethany and I decided to get married, and I was 40 years old, so I, never married or anything. And I was 40 and she was 5 years younger. We decided to get married. So we ended up getting married at our 4th of July conference. We have a Freedom Conference every 4th of July, one of the quarterly conferences. So we ended up getting married July 5th, the day after the conference closed, in the heart, up at 6,000 feet of the heart of the inner retreat. This land in Montana, but it was a huge production. They had huge tents there, and a lot of going on in these different tents, sometimes in Spanish, over a lot of Spanish people. But I should, if I find a photo, I know that I should probably send you a photo of the marriage. But it was a double wedding marriage, and everybody's in white. It's real nice. And that was, of course, 1983, the 5th of July. And then a few months later, we had a reception at Patty's house because they didn't go to the wedding, my folks. They weren't at the wedding up at the inner retreat. So we had a big reception. And that's the picture I sent you, was at the reception. So it was a few months after actually we got married. We had the reception. And then went back to work for the Navy, of course. I was working there the whole time. And then in 1988, we bought a house in November. Beginning of November, we moved up to Livingston, Montana, and bought a house up there. And really what we were doing, we were following the church. To get down to the nitty-gritty, we were following them up there. So we bought a house there, and I remember sitting out on the front porch when we first got up there in November. And the wind was blowing, and it was about 0 degrees. And myself, and our 3 boys. Leah wasn't born then. This was, back in 88. I said, what are we doing up here? It's freezing. It was only November. And I commuted back to work. Well, I went back and lived with my folks, then commuted up to Montana about every month. Just usually took the bus, slept during the night or whatever. And so every few weeks I'd go back to Montana. And I remember Bethany, she came down to Santa Barbara in around February, because it got down to minus 50 degrees in Montana. So the next day she gets the kids together and gets them all down. So we're all down and having a picnic in a nice grassy meadow in Santa Barbara, a few days later. So of course we stayed with the folks at that time. But the kids loved, meanwhile, Dad and Mom actually moved down in 73, the same year I started work for the Navy. They left Redwood City and moved and bought a place down in Santa Barbara to be around us. And then Patty and Dean were married down there. And Dean worked at the Hope Ranch in Santa Barbara. So we were down there, so they came down to be in Santa Barbara and bought a nice house with a little land. And Dad right away started gardening. This was in 73 when I first moved there, and Pat and Dean were already there. And Dad did a big garden, and then right away he had a swimming pool dug for Mom, because Mom was from Jamaica, of course, and she loved the water and she wanted a pool. So right away Dad had a little swimming pool dug in. They had to do the whole shebang. And then down lower in the land, there's a lot of corn, and I have pictures of our kids walking in these big corn stalks and eating the string beans. And Dad was quite a gardener. And that's what kept him going, because he kept working until he was 92. Well, 91 actually, when he moved down with the Gibsons. So this is I'm up to commuting back and forth between Santa Barbara and our home in Livingston, Montana. So then in 1990, the beginning of 1990, so we'd been there a little over a year. Bethany said, if I was you, I'd think about coming up, because we got the call to go into the shelters. So what was going on was the Ascended Master saying, it'll hold a balance if you build shelters and you're able to be. This was when there was a big nuclear Cold War going on, and the schools were teaching the kids to get under the desks and things. So we actually built underground shelters in land in Montana. And mine was never finished, though. I did work on one. And we got the call one day too in 90, and Bethany said, you should get up here. So I quit the Navy after 17 years, quit working there. And of course, hindsight is 20/20, and if I'd known what I know now, I wouldn't have. I would have stayed at least for 20 years. But we went underground for a day. I think it was just one night, maybe 2 nights, and in the shelters. And they were, some of them were pretty fancy, some weren't, but you had to have the air circulation and all kinds of stuff in these shelters. And nothing happened. We were going down, we went into underground, and there was no big altercation or anything going on. And we come to find out later, it was probably between Pakistan and India over the border, because they both had nuclear weapons at that time. And so the reason that one reason we had these shelters was, of course, was by being prepared, it would inoculate that ever happening. It would not happen. So at this time, I was, of course, done with the Navy. And then in 91, Leah came along, and she was a bright surprise, our youngest. And we had 3 boys, Benjamin, Basil, and Roland. And I'll tell you real quickly the dates. Benjamin was born in a little over a year after we were married, in August 25th of 1984. And then a year and a half later, Basil was born on Lincoln's birthday in February of 86. And then a year and a half after that, Roland was born in August of 87. So Roland and Benjamin are 3 years apart. We wanted children, put it that way. That's, we were gotten married, and so we wanted to be blessed with children, and we had. And none of them were born in a hospital. Leah, actually, our 4th child, was born she was born in June 22nd in 1991. She was born in our upstairs bedroom in our house in Livingston. And Bethany was actually a midwife trainer too. Bethany, we were into natural things. And, nothing unnatural about a childbirth. It's all natural. And if you do it right, it's not, it's an enlightening experience. So it actually was videoed and everything by our lady who did it. And then, and after that, I took a job I didn't have a job up here. Well, it turns out when I first quit working for the Navy, the 17 years after I'd been there 17 years, when I first quit, I sent out a bunch of resumes, and some headhunters came looking for me, saying, they wanted me to set up a satellite system in Italy. I said, no, I can't do that. I didn't make these satellites. I just take care of them. I said, well, no, but we see your resume, and they kept phoning me up to take it, but I didn't have the confidence to do it. And because they wanted a new satellite system there. And then after I turned it down, Bethany says, you should have taken that job. Our kids could have been bilingual and had beautiful arts careers, or grounding, in the beautiful arts. And I said, well, now you tell me. And I got to thinking about I could have done it, because I knew the people back in Johns Hopkins, PhD type guys who helped me if I needed help. And I could have enlisted their help, even formally. And then my mentor, Joe Podorczyk, he would have done it too. So I ended up taking a job at the end of 1991, selling art, being an art dealer. But it was on the road art sales. And believe it or not, I'm still doing that, but I'm completely independent now. And I've been doing it for over 25 years, well, since 91. And I tell people it's the right side of my brain. Before it was the logical left side that I was using, and now my right side, and now neither one works.
I'm sorry. You also adopted a child at some point.
Oh, no. Yeah, I meant to rectify that. No, I never adopted a child. That was something I did on my own before we got married.
Oh.
And when I was working for the Navy, before I was married, in 1976, too, I took one of my many trips. I took a bicycle ride through Virginia, 400 miles. But in 1975, the Viet Cong took over Hanoi and took over Vietnam. We lost the war in Vietnam in 1975. And so it came out on the news briefs in the Navy when I worked for them that if you were able, would you sponsor a Vietnamese person who wants to come live in America and doesn't want to stay in Vietnam for various reasons? So I said, yeah, sure. I was doing that. I was living by myself. I said, yeah, I can afford that or whatever. And I bought a house in the meantime in Oakview, which is near Ventura, with a half acre. It was just a little house though. So it took a while, but after a while, they sent me a Vietnamese boy, Young boy, to live with me, who wanted to live there. And he had controlled tuberculosis though. So we were getting free medicine for him, but he was quite healthy when he lived there. And I remember sometimes I'd go over and see some of he got in with the Vietnamese groups, in Ventura area. And I remember one of their favorite foods was putting a raw egg in the ground, letting it sort of rot. Then that was a delicacy, and I couldn't get into that. No delicacy for me. But anyway, Young boy, I had him when I did the bike trip through Virginia, the 400 miles for the bike centennial, which was the 200-year anniversary of our country. This was 1976. So that was Young boy. And then and then I'd ride my bike up to see the folks in Santa Barbara from Oakview, and that was about 40 miles. But back to the more recent history. I started working in the art, and Bethany has since become real good at yoga. And she's really a certified yoga instructor. And I still go to the church. We got a teaching center here in Bozeman. Bozeman, by the way, is inundated with out-of-state licenses from Oregon, all the states that are having little civil unrest. In Washington and California, we see a lot of those licenses here because people want to get away from the mayhem, have a good life. And I've been doing the art ever since. And what was I thinking about?
Just your current lifestyle. Is that some art on the back wall behind you there? Anything to do with the art that you're dealing with?
Oh yeah, that's Archangel Raphael. That's just a artist rendering of Raphael. Raphael is a consort of Mary. Archangel, actually Mother Mary was an archangel, angel too. But yeah, that's Raphael. That's from the church. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm up in the bedroom now. Mm-hmm. And there's altars. Bethany's put crystal stones all over, all kinds of crystals and cups with gold lining and all kinds of stuff around decorate. Everywhere she puts that. But
I remember you told me that Bethany likes to travel a lot.
Yeah. Bethany has done a lot of traveling. That's true. She has been back to the East Coast to take a course, Robert Seinfeld's course, and becoming your true, for want of a better word, becoming your true self. Mm-hmm. And then about 2 years ago, I went with her down to Arizona, and she went on to see Dr. Greer's contact protocol for contacting ETs, because these UFOs have been all over the place, going bananas, even contrary to what our lame government's denying. And it's been all. And anyway, she went down, and they'd go out at night and do protocols and have interactions with these spaceships. Dr. Greer was a real doctor, and he is quite good at ESPing and things like that. So they've actually got on film a picture of Bijou, a little ET and whatever. But I stayed and saw my friend Billy Crane, who I went to high school with, in Sun City, which is a suburb of Phoenix, a western suburb of Phoenix.
So do you like to travel?
Yeah, we're both Gemini. Bethany was June 8th and I'm June 14th. So we're both Gemini. So we like to travel and like to meet people and like curious about things. We're pretty much like that.
Your children, what are they all doing now?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Well, Benjamin, our eldest, born in 1984, is following in his dad's footsteps. He's working for the Navy as an engineer for the Navy. His degree is in chemical engineering from here in Montana State University. He graduated with honors. He's doing real good down there, working on Coronado Island. In fact, he's helping us with the mortgage on a new house that we bought here 2 years ago, not quite 2 years ago. And then Basil, he's living with us right now, but it's only a temporary thing for about 2 months. He is really, his concentration is on Bitcoin. He's into cryptocurrency, and he's watching that, and he's saying how, in one day I made $5,000 or whatever as it goes up, or I lost $1,000, whatever. But he's doing a lot of mock trading. He doesn't put in a lot of money in it. But he's actually made I guess he's got stats now about 100,000 in good old American dollars, good old greenbacks. Oh, I got my glasses on still. There. Yeah, that's better. You didn't train me very well, Merrilee.
I didn't want to interrupt you. You were doing so well.
Oh, I see. Yeah, with my blinders on. So Basil actually has been just starting to do landscaping, real serious landscaping, the last 2 summers. We just quit doing it last week because it actually was 60 degrees here last week.
Mm.
So he's been doing landscaping, and then the same guy during the winter, and this is pretty typical in Montana. In the winter, they do snow plowing. In the summer, they do landscaping, young people mostly. So he last winter, he also did snow plowing, but it was an ordeal for him because you have to get up at 6 a.m. and then, you get back maybe 7 a.m. and your sleep cycle is not exactly steady. So anyway, he's not doing the snow plowing this year. He's just doing the landscaping. And I guess doing pretty good in Bitcoin. Roland has been living with us steady, our youngest son, 3 years younger than Ben. But he's been working at the Mongolian barbecue as their one of two main cooks. Well, there is only two cooks, but he's been doing it for 10 years. He's about 33 now. He finally has a girlfriend he's real devoted to. And we see them both quite a bit. But Roland is a guy, when you go into Mongolian barbecue, you fill up a bowl with the food you want in the bar, shrimp or whatever, and veggies. And then you take them to him. And then they've got a big hot plate that's about 6 foot in diameter. And there's a big hot plate, and they throw all the food on there and they cook it. And then put it back in your bowl. So Roland's been doing that for probably 10 years. And he makes good money. He's been saving money and living with us. He did it also up in Great Falls, but then he had to pay rent and everything. So he was actually not doing too good financially up there. And Leah, 5 years ago, and I did look up that picture that I sent you. It's pretty neat. I forgot about it. But I sent a picture that's probably going to be on this talk about Leah's wedding. And she got married on Valentine's Day 5 years ago, 2015. That would have been 2015. So she got married there. And she found a guy on the East Coast. Well, she graduated, first of all, from U of M in Missoula University in film, photography, acting, and I don't know what else. She was doing all that stuff. And so she ended up going into the East Coast to go on a boat trip for wannabe models or something like that. And she won awards for swimsuit and la, la, la. She ended up in New York, and that's where she met Jay, her future husband. And it turns out that Jay's family is very well to do. Harry, they've got a 5-acre home on Long Island, and he designed the home. It's huge. It's a mansion. And they've got an elevator for their Ferraris to go up and down, electric elevator down below the house. And there's a pool and a patio house and all that stuff. Anyway, he started Harry, which is Leah's father-in-law, Jay's dad, started just driving a taxi when he came here from India many years ago. They're Sikhs, which is same as Hindu, but without the caste system. They wear the turbans. And so he came and was a taxi driver, then became a mechanic in a shop, had his own machine shop, and then started getting gas stations. So now they've got 60 convenient gas station stores in New York, their own trucks. He's probably a billionaire, put it that way. And they paid for all our executive flights that took us. They paid for our airplane flights to India in the first class section where they recline all the way, and we flew. It was a long flight from New York to India. Then they probably paid everything. So we were there for about four days, maybe 5 days. They bought us clothes and all that stuff to suit for the wedding. And you've seen the wedding.
Yep. Now I wanted to mention that you had it taped there, and now we have it on our blog, which is fabulous. It's a great tape.
Yeah. Leah, being her keen eye, says they could have done a better job. She thought it should have been done a little different.
That is
But
wonderful.
yeah, we're all here except for Ben. Well, and Leah, she's on the East Coast, and no children yet from any of our children. And of course, Leah's mom, Kamala, has been after. As soon as they got married, she wanted Leah to have children, Leah and Jay, but they're not into that right now. And she's only 29, so she, I didn't marry Bethany until she was 35. So, let it be in their own due time.
Right, right.
Yeah, so we're all living here in Montana. Well, they all did live here in Montana, but now we're here. Bethany and I are here. And actually, 2 years ago, we did go for 6 months down to New Mexico and to check it out down there in Raytown, a little city in northern New Mexico. There's a friend who moved down there, and so we stayed in her house. But it was blah. After 6 months, Bethany wanted to move, and I said, yeah, because, she teaches yoga here in Bozeman. It's downsized a little bit. And then all our friends here in Bozeman. And Bethany, though, is not in the church at all anymore as far as going formally to the services or St. Germain service or Violet Flame, because she says the universe is her teacher. And so she's really into spiritual things.
So then you decided to stay in Montana.
Yeah, we're just staying in Montana. And of course, the winters get long. And so maybe we'll go stay with Benjamin or something down in San Diego come February or March when it keeps staying cold. It does that here. Anyway, that's pretty much my story.
That's a great story. Well, I think we need to close it now. And if there's anything else you want to add, a last thing, but it's a great.
No, I don't think I'll do like Don and say, I got more to do.
But anyway,
I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, we did cover a lot. Thank you so much. And I'm going to now just sign out. And hi, Ken. How are you doing?
Fine, Merrilee. Good to see you. Cuz.
Nice to see you.
Well, I think this is known, but I was born on Flag Day. And yes, I am patriotic. I love my country. I love God. And I love my fellow man. So we're having kind of tumultuous times right now with this presidential election that just was taken, but it's not done with almost 2 weeks ago. And there's going to be a voting and ballot manipulation check being done by the different states. And hopefully this will bring out the truth and if there was some hanky-panky done in the voting, and resolve everything in accordance with God's will. Anywho, now back a little bit of my history with my mom. She, as you know, from myself and from my brother, was born in Jamaica, moved here when she was 20 with Fred, who is her younger brother, 2 years younger. He must have been 18. And we didn't know him, of course, at that time. She married Dad when she was 29. But the whole contingency of Jamaicans, it seemed like, ended up in San Francisco, or most of them did. They moved there all the way to City by the Bay. And I have recollections of the Jewish rituals that they did. My cousin Keith, who is Charlie's son, he was a cousin. That was Mom's younger brother, the youngest of the three, was Charlie Abrams. He kept the Abrams name. And I remember going up to Keith's bar mitzvah when he turned 13. It's his auspicious date with the Jewish religion, because that's the opening into manhood. So the whole family went up there for the bar mitzvah, and it was moving. They had a lot of ritual they did. And then I was about the same age. So when I turned 13, my grandma, Mom's mom, Julia Abrams, gave me a gold ring on my 13th birthday because we didn't have a bar mitzvah. And this is it, if anybody can see it from here, but it has my initials on it. So we had some good memories of the time. And Mom's younger brother, Fred, who's just right next to her, became a very successful interior decorator in Palo Alto, which is kind of the upscale place from Redwood City where we moved. Because it has Stanford University and real nice greenery and all kinds of stuff. And we'd go up and see Uncle Fred and Louise Henricus, because he changed his last name from Abrams to Henricus because of our relation to the one of the first kings of Portugal. Anyway, Uncle Fred had a high-end interior decorating store, and he had a pool. So we'd all kind of go there on a Sunday and lounge around this big pool, and everybody was saying, "Hi, love, yo, love," and it was pretty easy to tell, even at this age, to tell a person if they're from Jamaica. It doesn't take much listening to have that done. The other person that I didn't mention very much was my cousin Gary and Johnny were sons of Lucille and John Gibson. Of course, Lucille was one of the youngest of the 12 Green family. And Gary and I palled around quite a bit when I started work for McDonnell Douglas down in Long Beach, Naples. And I mentioned how we had some episodes, but I feel I should also mention that besides being sailing, his big stress reliever was going to a free energy conference, which were quite prevalent actually down in LA at the time. And he took me to a couple. There was astronomical clubs meeting and things like that, but he really did like to talk about anti-gravity, free energy, and we'd have long talks about it. And he gave me a book on all kinds of free energy stuff. And we talked about Thomas Bearden, the naval commander who figured out how to do anti-gravity. But we've back engineered all that anyway, we know, from the spaceships that have gone down. And Gary and I kept in communications. And after, he ended up having diabetes. And he insisted on never taking insulin. And he really didn't change his eating patterns very deeply at all. I tried to get him to eat more salad and things like this. But anyway, he had diabetes for quite a while, and his feet hurt, the circulation. And so about 5 years ago, he actually passed away. Johnny is still working down there in LA, but Gary has passed away, and I'm not sure about the time, but he had a house, and he was working on a boat when he was there too. And we had a big funeral for him. Johnny put it on down in the LA area. So the other thing I wanted to mention was about my sister Patty. She, had an accident where she was hit by a car when she was a pedestrian. And her foot, as Harlan mentioned, never quite fully developed. She had almost a club foot on her left foot. And I remember every evening, just about when she was growing up, Dad would take her foot in his lap and rub the ankle to help her with her growing it. But she never really, of course, it never really grew fully. But she had two nice children, Marina and Colin, living in Santa Barbara. They did And Marina, of course, loved the horses. In fact, she still works with horses now. But Patty took the kids on a trip to Disney World in Florida, all the way from Santa Barbara, and she had a new Honda. And on the way back, she fell asleep and went across the lane and ran into a oncoming vehicle. It was a truck, and she passed. She never recovered, and that was in 1989. So she was born in 1944, December of 44. So she was only 45. And it was, of course, a big loss. And then Dean took care of the children. He remarried her husband. But that got rid of one of us 3 children from Alan and Phyllis. There's a few other things maybe I could say, but this feels pretty complete. What do you think, Merrilee?
Yes. The only other thing I was wondering is I remember being with your family at some point growing up, and I think it must have been me coming down to California.
Yeah, and as we talked, it's drawing a blank on my behalf when and where that happened.
Yeah.
I do remember, though, the Gibsons coming up to Redwood City to see us all the way from LA. John and Lucille and Johnny and Gary. They had actually a third son who passed away young. But they'd come up, drive all the way to Redwood City to the house that Dad built. And it was an exciting time because Gary would come in and we'd all come in mingling, and Gary and I would right away start wrestling real hard. This is when we were just young. So we used to enjoy seeing the family, the company coming around, and the whole shindig. It wasn't that often either.
Yeah, I do remember. I do remember actually coming to Patty's wedding. I was in her wedding, which was interesting.
Oh, I didn't know that, in Santa Barbara, huh?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, there was something else I was thinking of, but it slips my mind right now.
Okay. Well, anyway, I think it was really great that we had this extra time here. Thank you for sharing those last few thoughts.
Oh, yeah, you're very welcome, Merrilee. Thank you for doing what you're doing, taking upon this.
Oh, it's great fun.
Story of history. Yeah, you're getting to know us all well.
Yep, we all are.
Yeah. Well, I did want to say that we did make the round trips up to Oregon and Washington to see all you relatives that lived up in the Pacific Northwest. We did do that almost every year, it seemed like. And then Dad would take us camping to the Mount Lassen or wherever.
Tell us about your backpacking trip, Ken.
Ah, yes, my infamous backpacking trip. This was in the summer of 1972, because I left working for McDonnell Douglas in 71, and then that was my year of macrobiotics when I didn't do the right macrobiotic diet. But then this year was my mind dynamics year, which I mentioned. But anyway, I was into nature and going out and communing with nature. So I decided I'd take a backpacking trip following the Pacific Crest Trail in Oregon. And that was a new trail that just was opening up. It wasn't even full length, I don't think, from Mexico to Canada. And it was a hiking trail going about 7,000 feet through Oregon. And I decided that would be a nice little getaway. So I knew that Uncle Arthur, Richard's dad, lived up along the river there in, well, it's a pretty place. I forget where, but it's where they have a lot of the pit fruits. And so I gave Uncle Arthur a call, and he said, sure, yeah, Kenny, come on up. Yes, I do have the cabins on the river. So we can put you up if need be. And I said, well, I might not even see you, but we'll, if I need something, I'll let you know. I said, okay. And he said, oh, by the way, those mosquitoes are going to eat you alive in July and August. And he laughed and laughed and laughed. And I said, no, they won't. Well, it turns out that there's some truth to that, because I remember I was up in a big meadow. I'm going to jump right in here. But I was in a big meadow up in along Pacific Crest Trail. This was maybe a few days or a weekend. And it was huge. And I walked around it in the trees, but the mosquitoes were all over and they were eating me real bad. In fact, I had a mosquito net that I used to sleep in. And this was July. So I probably shouldn't even say this, but after a while, the mosquitoes, would be eating me and I'd see them filling up with my blood. So I say, okay, you guys. So I just picked one off and plopped it in my mouth. And pretty soon I was eating a lot of mosquitoes. And I don't think any damage was done except maybe, whatever, etherically. But back to the beginning, the way I got to Oregon was a hitchhike from Redwood City. So it was a long hitchhike, but back those days, it was common to do that. It was not something outlandish. So I ended up at Crater Lake, north end of Crater Lake, and that's where I started the Pacific Crest Trail when I got into it. And then I had a good time. I remember in the mornings I'd sleep when I was sleeping in my new down sleeping bag, extra length. It was cold in the mornings, but the sun was out, and I'd be laying in my sleeping bag, and I'd get out the book by J.R.R. Tolkien, The Hobbit. This was 1972. The book I think must have just come out shortly, and that was such a neat book. It put me pretty much in the etheric world the whole time I was hiking. I'd get up after reading that book in my sleeping bag and be looking in trees for little fairies and elementals and thinking about the Hobbit. And this was the first Hobbit one. This was with Bilbo. So that was quite a story that he concocted. And then, of course, followed the Lord of the Rings series of 3. And after about, say, maybe 2 weeks, it probably was 2 weeks, maybe about a week and a half, my feet were starting to give me a little bit of a problem. I was getting blisters. So I gave Uncle Arthur a call and said, sure, yeah, come on up. You can come and rest. So he came and picked me up at one of the campgrounds. By the way, there were some big campgrounds along the way that I could get nourishment. And took me up to the house, and I stayed with him. And I remember his wife, it wasn't, of course, Edith, but his wife at the time, Uncle Arthur, really liked the Mile High cake she made. I go, oh boy, look at all those sweets, I was thinking. But Uncle Arthur told me some interesting stories about my dad. He said how Alan, who of course was older, he was the second next to the oldest, would be working and bring his paycheck back from working as a carpenter during the Depression to help the family out, the 12 kids that were being raised, well, whoever was there. And he'd do that a lot. And Uncle Arthur said he really, really appreciated what my dad was doing, which was carpentry work. And Dad, by the way, did carpentry most of his life, as Harlan talked about too, until he got probably around 55, maybe 60, and he became a clerk of the works and a building inspector. But Dad did have arthritis from middle age on, and he had his hip replaced actually twice, and then his left one was fused, but he kept getting around fine. In fact, that was the way that got rid of all the trouble was by having his left hip fused. But he could walk fine. In fact, he did gardening until he was 91. And he was a hard worker his whole life. So it was nice to hear that little vignette by Uncle Arthur. And then I forget when, but it was, I guess, the night before I was leaving, they fixed a big dinner for me with lobster. and butter. And so I must have kind of overdid it because the next morning I had an upset stomach, but I said, take me anyway to the trailhead. I'll walk it off. So Uncle Arthur did, and we said goodbye, but that was a nice little stay. And I hiked probably, I feel about maybe 400 miles, but I don't think it was that far, all in all. But it wasn't a big marathon. I was just going along through the trees and communing. That was my episode in Oregon. And around the same time, I think I also went to Grass Valley for some kind of conference, camping out conference, where I got the book. One of the instructors was reading the book by Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, Autobiography of a Yogi, which has really made me a believer in reincarnation and the like. That is a classic. Anyway, enough said, I think.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that last story. That was a great story. I'm glad we're going to finish off with that one.
Yeah, that was one that was kind of mutually agreed upon. Yeah, well, good. And thanks again, Merrilee.
Okay, thank you.
Enjoy your sun. I'm sorry I
no worries.
Sun washing. That's a good thing to do, by the way. It ties you in with your infinity, believe it or not, directly. Because you know it's
the sunset every night, right?
The what?
Yes, yeah. Visiting the sunset every night. I love it.
Yeah, but you know it's going to come up in the morning.
Right. Okay, good night now.
Good night. Good afternoon.
Okay, for you, right?
Time for 49ers, right. Go watch a little of their game.
Okay, enjoy. See you now.
You too, Merrilee.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.